Cheerilee made her way through the backstage area, albeit a good distance away from the hole of snails thing, headed for the dressing room. After that scene with Sweetie Belle, two soliloquy scenes followed, one with Reginald and the other with the king. Since she took her sweet time, the first had certainly ended already, but as the mayor passed a few corridors leading up to the stage itself, she thought she could still hear Abel's voice on stage.
She had hurried. She might still be able to assist Snips in finding his costume for the last scene. If he was indeed as dumb as he looked and hadn't been able to find it on his own yet. As she rounded a corner, something crashed into her at high speed, causing her to stumble back in a few steps as the air got slammed out of her lungs.
She looked down, then she got her bearings, and saw Snip sitting there on his plot, shaking his head to dispel the dizziness that set on due to the crash. "Snips, what are you doing here, and not even in costume? You need to get ready for the last scene," she said by way of reprimand.
The Scion colt with the okra,
I think.
Okra, that's
Or orchard, I don't know. I don't know.
Fuck. The Cyan colt with the orched mane looked hugely relieved to see his teacher, and he immediately scrambled to his feet, tears in the corner of his eyes. He started talking.
"Oh, Miss Cheerilee, it's terrible!" he yelled out. "I was looking for my costume, and I couldn't find it, so I went looking for you, and I couldn't find you, but I found snails, and...
He took a huge breath at this point, obviously struggling to get the words out. "And he's dead."
I do like the juxtaposition between Newey's deadpan read and Jake putting 120% into the polls.
I nominate that every time we ever do one of these again, Mewes is always right after me.
Cheerilee's world grinded to a halt with those words, cold sweat breaking out across her forehead as she felt the slightest hint of panic rise up from her stomach like bile. She'd strayed from her schedule, and she just found out what would come to cost her.
Her mind worked frantically to figure out a way to minimize the damage caused, to somehow soothe the colt enough so that her plans could go through, but no easy solution presented itself. Snips, on the other hand, seemed to pull himself together, turning around and taking a few steps. "Come on," he called back to her. "We can't continue to play now. We've got to tell the others."
No, the play must go on. Cheerilee felt a block of ice drop into her stomach as the Cyan colt galloped off. He would. I mean, how many times do you see ice fall onto people? This story, I have to read it literally. No. If he reached any pony else, he would just reach out and stab.
With a sudden burst of speed that would have dazzled even Rainbow Dash, she rushed forward, catching up to the younger pony in mere seconds. In one fluid movement, she slipped from a full gallop into a full-blown karate kick, focusing all her kinetic energy into one single hoof. Snips got a good hit in the side, so good, in fact, that the kick sent him crashing to a nearby wall, at the bottom of which he fell in a crumbled heap.
Is she also in character for being a karate champ?
No.
Okay.
We've seen a couple ponies in, like, martial arts outfits, but never her.
Okay.
Cheerilee silently thanked Rainbow Dash for all the time she'd come to give the kids some karate lessons. Some of it had obviously stuck in her head over the years.
Before the colt could do more than roll onto his back, Cheer descended upon him like a hawk, keeping him down with one hoof as she started beating him into the face with the other in the throes of blind rage.
Here was one who stood between her and reaching her goal, and she could think of nothing but removing him from her path right away, no matter the cost.
Snips feebly tried to defend himself, but he was a lot smaller than the mare, not to mention a unicorn, while she had all the physical prowess of an earthly pony to fall back on. The beating continued mercilessly, Snip's face swelled up and blood running out of his nose and down from the places where she broke through his skin. His penis exploded, and his nails flew off.
In an act of desperation, and subconscious part of his mind reached out to the magical reserves he didn't even think he had, and his horn started to glow with green with power. All of a sudden, a wave of arcane energy zipped past Cheerilee's head, leaving a long, thin cut stretching down the length of her cheek. The fuchsia-colored mare gasped in surprise as blood started trickling down from the wound, which wasn't all that serious, although it did sting a little.
Her gaze dropped down to the Colt's cutie mark, and she realized she should have seen this coming, the specialty obviously involving cutting of some sort. Apparently he wasn't restricted to using of scissors.
Subtle change in the aura around the horns warned Cheerilee that another spell was about to be flung at her. So with no other options in mind, she raised her hoof before ramming it down to dish out another punch. Only this time, she didn't aim for Snip's face, but for the horn itself. As she hit her target, the colt's head jerked back, and he groaned as the horn tugged at his skull, the spell discharging into the wall behind him instead of its intended target. The magical light around the horn flickered for a moment before coming back in force, and Cheerilee just knew the next spell was already on its way.
She once again started raining down punches, now aiming all of them at the horn. Spells exploding against the wall, ceiling and floor left and right, sending tiny pieces of rubble flying everywhere.
Now, surely, they're in the backstage. It's not soundproof. Right? Surely now, right? They would realize that this adult is beating the crap out of a child. Just sitting on it and punching it over and over again in the face with a closed fist. Maybe? Okay. At first, the colt took the beating like a stallion. But as the mare hit the same spot time and time again, it became increasingly difficult for him to fight back against the pain that was rising in his skull. All of a sudden, little cracks started to appear in the horn, until one final strike from Cheerilee broke it clear off.
When that happened, magic exploded into the room, throwing Cheerilee off the colt and making her slide several meters over the floor until she came to a halt a few meters away from Snips.
The magical feedback seemed to have been a lot worse for the cyan pony himself, as he laid witlessly on the floor.
Rambling to her hooves, the fuchsia mare picked up Snip's horn when she passed along the way to his motionless form, clutching it between her front hooves like a dagger as she kneeled over him. With a moment's hesitation, she rammed the horn down straight into his chest. Blood splattered everywhere and welled up underneath Cheer's hooves. The colt's eyes shot open, and he stared first at his chest and then at her. "Why?" he managed to whisper hoarsely as life fled from his body.
Well, he got off easy.
Well, he was just
Probably
a
had a
victim of
device for it.
circumstance. Sort of.
Okay.
Cheerilee didn't bother to answer his question, simply pulling the horn out of his body and ramming it back into his chest a few times for good measure, until he stopped moving altogether.
Cheerilee panted heavily from actual physical exertion this time, as she rolled off of Snip's court. Trying to catch her breath, she just lay on the cold floor. Killing him like this had been quite exhilarating in some way, even if it did all end rather fast. She made a mental note to keep the horn with her. It'll make a pleasant dildo.
A lick over her cheek, sampling her own blood for the first time, and not altogether unpleasant, even if it did feel a bit strange.
She was glad she's been able to try this struggle for survival approach at least once, though, even though for her original plan for Apple Bloom, he had been 1,000 times more elegant.
Realization suddenly hit her with a sickening force. Her plans for Snips and Apple Bloom. The plan required both of them to maneuver each other into the right places. And even after that, the next few steps also required interaction between them. Now that Snips was gone, it couldn't possibly work.
And that was the least of her troubles. The play still had one scene to go, and Snips was supposed to be in it. The mayor began thinking up countless new plans on the spot, but she rejected all of them out of hand for being too ridiculous, too short-sighted, too dangerous, too risky. Because this whole thing hasn't been super risky. She began to fear the situation was hopeless, that she had finally maneuvered herself into a corner she could not escape from. To keep the audience in the dark, the final scene had to go through without a hitch, so someone had to go out there to play against Apple Bloom. With no pony else left from the original cast, she could only count on herself, because that's not going to be questionable at all.
Oh.
Well, we've learned anything from this story, the ponies in this universe are very stupid. Also blind and deaf.
I have a question.
And
Did
super duper strong. Go ahead.
Did I just read 2 lines without stopping?
You
Yes,
sure
you did.
did.
Ah, you thought so. Okay. I'm very tired, guys, so I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm starting to lose it a bit myself. She'd have to improvise. It probably would not work, but it was the best shot she had. The only shot she had.
She quickly galloped towards the dressing room and headed into the back room, wiping the blood off her with a rag before opening the chest that held Reginald's final.
Considering you just beat somebody to death and then stabbed them, and your cheek is cut, you probably look incredibly fucking disheveled. You're gonna need more than a simple rag to clean yourself up with.
That's a no rag is gonna stop that left eye from twitching all the time.
It was far too small for her, of course, but it included a particular dashing brooch she could use as a fastener.
Cheerilee quickly picked up the brooch and continued on towards the back of the room, where several bolts of cloth lay stashed. She chose a black piece that was just large enough to fit around her body and swung over her back using the brooch as a clasp in her neck to end up with something vaguely reminiscent of a hooded cloak.
It wouldn't hold up scrutiny, but since the audience would only see her from far away, it just might do. At least she hoped so. As a finishing touch, she slid a knife she found on a nearby shelf through the fabric, improvising some manner of sheath so that the blade rested against her chest, relatively hidden.
The mare then dashed off in the direction of the stage, realizing she had no time left to waste. She brought up a mental map of the building on the fly to figure out exactly where she had to go. For the next scene, Reginald was supposed to emerge out of a mountain cave after the king had climbed up the mountain to meet his challenge.
Knowing that, Cheerilee rounded a turn and rushed up the flight of stairs, emerging at last into the dark cave. From here, she could see the audience, but she was quite sure the darkness still hid her.
Judging from the fact that Apple Bloom was nowhere to be seen, nowhere in sight, she figured she had made it in time. She quietly congratulated herself over this accomplishment, and she took a few moments to catch her breath and rest up, feeling that she may soon need the energy. It only took her a minute to start hearing the filly's voice coming closer, and pretty soon after that, she came into view, having made her way up the mountain slope. She was wearing relatively simple attire compared to the royal mantle from earlier. She had sheathed her toy sword with her, attached to a side where it could easily be removed from the pommel with her teeth.
Reginald, I have come to face your challenge. Come out and fight, like a stallion. King Gold Crown roared, looking around defiantly. Cheerilee took one deep breath and hid her face a bit deeper under the hood, even though she wasn't sure why. He wasn't feeling anyone, or not for not very long at least. Hold on, somebody's knocking on the door.
Looking around, definitely. Yep, definitely looking around. Definitely.
Walling back her fear, she stepped out of the cave and onto the highest point of the stage. The mountain summit was located several meters above the mine Cheerilee had disappeared into earlier. But as it was placed all the way back of the stage, even the ponies occupying the front rows could still see the actors up there relatively easily.
Cheerilee could hear the crowd talking and whispering to each other, as she stepped out of the shadows. They were obviously wondering what in the hay she was doing up there on the stage. Apple Bloom herself was even more confused, and as she had expected to see Snips here, not her teacher.
Miss Cheerilee, why are you... she began to say quietly.
I see you have come, O brave king, and I applaud your bravery. As a token of my respect, I shall face you here in my one true form. Up till now, witchcraft and sorcery have hidden me from your eyes, but no longer. Tonight, we fight an honest battle. Cheerilee's voice boomed through the complex, easily going over Apple Bloom's.
The explanation sounded tacky even to her own ears, but it was the best she'd been able to come up with at such short notice. In a sudden moment of inspiration, she gave Apple Bloom a conspirator's wink, praying the filly would play along, whatever the filly had assumed Cheer meant by it. She suddenly grinned and nodded eagerly as if to say, "Oh, I got it."
"Oh, fiend! I knew there was more afoot when you bested ma..." I guess he's...
Southern.
Okay.
Yeah.
"I knew there was more afoot when you bested my most trusted advisors. Witchcraft, this explains a lot indeed," the king responded, Apple Bloom's accent playing up slightly as they strayed from the original script. But the Fuchsia mare couldn't have cared less at that point. So relieved was she to see the other pony playing along with her ruse.
"Well then, let us dance," she cried out as she reached her right hoof under the cloak to draw the knife, creeping 3 hooves on the floor as she pointed the blade at her opponent.
The filly, in turn, took the pommel of her toy sword between her teeth and assumed a combative stance. The sword was far too big for her to carry it in her hoof, as Cheerilee did with her knife, so this was really the only option. That alone made the odds heavily favor the mare, and on top of that, one of them was wielding a real knife, while the other had a mostly harmless plastic toy.
The entire fight scene had been carefully choreographed, so Apple Bloom naturally stuck to her predetermined moves, and she expected Cheerilee to play by the book as well. Cheerilee would certainly have been capable of doing so, had she been so inclined, since she was the one who planned out the entire thing.
She was, however, extremely anxious to get it all over with quickly.
As soon as Apple Bloom advanced, Cheerilee stepped forward as well, intentionally allowing herself to get within reach of the filly's sword, instead of parrying Apple Bloom's swing with her dagger. As the filly expected, she jerked her head back to dodge it, confusing the hay. Yes, we get it. I know, it's cute. Not really, but I'm gonna keep going. Out of Apple Bloom and throwing her balance off completely.
The future mare quickly followed up with an attack of her own, which left a nasty cut over the filly's left cheek, almost a twin of the cut Cheerilee had behind her hood. Apple Bloom let out a sharp cry, more of surprise than out of pain, as she stumbled backwards. She looked at the red liquid dropping down the tip of the knife, and then at Cheerilee, who stared back coldly from underneath her hood.
"Wait, is that a..." she began saying, the words muffled by the pommel in her mouth, but Cheerilee did not at all feel like letting down the pressure now, and simply rushed forward.
Apple Bloom panicked and swung her sword, hitting Cheerilee right in the face in the process.
Cheerilee almost lost her balance as her head got slammed to the side, but somehow she managed to turn the movement into a 180-degree spin, bucking her hind legs at the filly.
She hit her right in the chest, and the sheer force of the blow sent the little one flying across the stage until she landed roughly on her back a meter or two away.
Billy took a deep breath, and a stinging pain in her chest alerting her to the fact that all was not well, and she didn't seem to be able to draw in as much air as usual either. She realized Cheerilee had probably broken some of her ribs and still felt dazed from the landing too.
Her teacher, however, wasted no time, and descended upon the fallen Apple Bloom like a vulture, ramming the knife through her right shoulder and into the wooden floor below, effectively pinning her down.
The filly held back a shriek of pain and swung her sword again, hitting Cheerilee in the head once more. It barely phased the mare, although it did piss her off. If it barely phased her, then it... Okay, whatever. All of a sudden, she brought her head down and headbutted the filly brutally, hoping to knock her out. That was exactly what happened as Applebloom's eyes rolled back in her head.
And this is the icing on the cake right here. Suddenly becoming acutely aware of the audience staring right up at her, Cheerilee remembered her lines, the words traditionally spoken by Rose at the end of the play, even though she had changed it up a bit. Again, hundreds of ponies watching, including Applebloom's family, and not one of them was saying, "Hey, what the fuck?" Continue.
She clutched her head as if she had been fatally wounded by that last blow, and then spoke dramatically.
Oh, what cruel fate! Now we must both die. But I implore you all, stallions and mares, never to forget Reginald, the sly. And then she allowed herself to fall to the floor, remaining there motionlessly.
She never understood those words herself, or what moral lesson they were supposed to convey. But they got the job done. The technician got the cue, and the curtains started to close, as the audience started stomping their hooves down onto the floor and cheered to show their approval. Because apparently they're all stupid and just went,
Yeah.
"Holy shit, that's an amazing fight scene!"
Yeah. Applejack is sitting there in the crowd going, "Man, look at that. It almost looked like Miss Cheerilee literally broke some of my sister's ribs. Ain't that a hoot?" Anyway, the play had been, on the whole, pretty well done, and the curious alternate ending did add a sudden something. Not to mention, the last fighting scene had been gorgeous. It didn't look like they were just pretending at all.
With a little relief, Cheerilee saw the curtain finally close completely, hiding the stage from the audience sight. She spread the word that the fillies and herself would have to start breaking down the stage props and cleaning up the backstage area right away, since some other group from Candlelot needed building later that week. That meant nobody was expecting them back home anytime soon.
She threw a glance at the unconscious filly next to her, who still had the knife embedded in her shoulder, and smiled.
She had all the time she needed to figure out something new for this one now. All the time in the world.
And again, no one notices that there's no, bowing and praise, and no one comes back to congratulate them. God, this is fucking stupid. Anyway, Applebloom, in her half-awake state, suddenly felt a cold glass being pressed against her lips. She instinctively opened her mouth to drink, quickly swallowing what she believed to be water. It only took her a few sips to realize, even in her groggy state, that what she was drinking wasn't water at all.
For one, it was a sort of metallic aftertaste, and for another, there were small bits and pieces in it that was sort of resembled.
At once, she was wide awake, coughing and spitting out the last of the fluid in her mouth. She had been bound to some sort of wooden table with leather straps. She saw Cheerilee standing next to her, holding a glass filled with a red liquid, grinning wickedly at her. I thought you liked it. Scootaloo made it herself, Cheerilee poured herself into it, you can say.
The mare cackled manically, as horror flashed across the filly's face. Scootaloo, you,
Killed her? Oh yes, I'm afraid so. She was the first to go, And you're the last,
the mayor said, feeling uncharacteristically chatty.
The filly turned pale. You killed all of them?
Oh, goodness, no, she replied, grinning as relief spread all over the filly's face. I didn't kill Snails. That was all you. The way you made that spotlight, or sun if you wish, fall down on him. Glorious.
Tears filled Applebloom's eyes as the realization hit her that all of her friends were gone, and that her fate wasn't likely to be any different. Why? She managed to let out as Cheerilee picked up a knife and held it up to the light appraisingly.
Why? Because you all deserved it. Each and every one of you is a blight upon this land, a weed in my garden, and it's time to end it, the mayor said coldly, as she positioned herself at the end of the table near the filly's hind legs. So, shall we?
War. I love war. Just start bringing Helsing into this. Hell yes, please. Helsing all over me, baby.
Hey kids, want to see a dead body?
Slowly and carefully, the mayor made an incision above the filly's hoof, cutting neatly around the circumference of her leg.
Apple Bloom tried to squirm, but the leather straps effectively held her in place as they dug into her skin. Cheerilee slipped the knife under her skin, carefully cutting the skin loose from the filly's flesh. The pain this caused was immense, but the filly clenched her teeth and refused to acknowledge it, every bit as stubborn as her sister was, not wanting to give Cheerilee the pleasure of hearing her scream.
Cheerilee obviously thought she cut enough for now, so she took hold of the flap of skin she cut loose with her teeth. Slowly she pulled it up the filly's legs, ripping more skin off as she went, flaying the filly alive. Despite her brave effort, this was simply too much for any pony to endure quietly. An Apple Bloom's scream rang out throughout the empty complex. Cheer continued making new incisions every time she accidentally tore the skin completely off, and then continued the flaying from there. Pretty soon half of the filly's leg was a bloody heap of bare flesh, every little twitch going through the exposed muscles, an antagonizing experience, blood dropping from everywhere.
But still, Cheer showed no signs of stopping, as she continued cutting and flaying, slowly moving up.
Eventually, the filly's entire leg was a disgusting, skinless mess. Cheerilee sadistically breathed out on for a while, making Apple Bloom shiver in pain. A little light sparkled in Cheer's eye as she bowed down and extended her tongue, slowly dragging it all along the way from the filly's hoof up to her flank. For a moment the mayor thought the screams that followed would deafen her permanently, but she pulled her tongue back into her mouth and savored the taste.
You're quite good. Want a taste? She whispered in Philly's ear.
Fuck you! The cutie mark crusader managed to stammer. Cheerilee laughed, amused by Apple Bloom's defiant nature. This one may be able to take some punishment, yet.
He diligently started cutting up the filly's other leg, making a long incision across the length of the leg this time, bringing the skin towards the side instead of outwards. The filly still tried to resist to keep up appearances, but she started sobbing and shivering as the pain became too much for her to bear, her breathing becoming ragged and her skin turning pale as a vividly scarlet blood coated the floor.
As she gained more confidence with the knife, her movements started to become quicker. In one fluid motion, she first cut the skin from the filly's left flank, then moved right over to cut off the skin on the right.
She picked up 2 pieces of skin with her teeth and held them up before the filly, before tossing them aside. Saw those? That's where your cutie mark would have been. If you had one, you never will know. Guess your crusading days are over.
Finally did, with the pain hadn't been able to do. It shattered the filly's last vestige of resistance. From the moment to the next, she started to cry loudly, her body shaking wildly, using up way more energy on all that than she should. Cheer started cutting out strips of skin on the filly's chest until the word weed was spelled out there.
By now the filly had lost enough blood and wasted enough energy that her responses started to become sluggish, ruining some of Cheerilee's fun. She tried poking the knife at a few pressure points, but the reaction was so underwhelming that Cheerilee shrugged and decided to call it quits.
She wrote weed and then it says every day. Smoke weed every day.
420.
Smoke weed every day.
Praise it and blaze it.
I just wanted, like, at this exact moment for Hat Bloom to get her cutie mark on the exposed muscle and flesh, and it's just a middle finger.
She undid the leather straps and pulled a tub out from under the table, the exact same one she had squeezed Scootaloo out into earlier, and Scootaloo was still there.
Not wanting to simply wait until Apple Bloom bled out, the mayor pulled her off the table by her hair, dropping her straight into the tub.
The blood and pieces of gore suddenly surrounding her stung on her bare flesh, and she let out a soft hiss.
Apple Bloom took in the scent of blood and saw an eye slowly drifting by. She suddenly realized just what she had been rocked in. This notion seemed to renew her strength as she scrambled to get out of the tub, but Cheerilee would have none of it. She grabbed the filly by her hair and with a hoof and forced her down into the pool of blood, keeping her mouth and nostrils under.
The filly screamed and swallowing mouthfuls of Scootaloo in the process as she thrust her legs about wildly, splattering the contents of the tub everywhere. Air bubbled up from her mouth, but Cheerilee kept her there firmly. Ecstatic to see the filly struggling died down slowly. As Apple Bloom's lungs started to burn more, she involuntarily tried to breathe anyways, filling her lungs with blood and gore.
After a last erratic twitch of one of her legs, Apple Bloom remained motionless. The fuchsia-colored mare waited a few more seconds before finally releasing the filly. Apple Bloom's mutilated body just kept laying still in the pool of blood that once had been Scootaloo. And Cheerilee knew her task had finally come to an end. All that was left was simply clean up.